and welcome. You're watching Business Plus. 10 days from now, the US economy could sink. That is, if the US government fails to raise its $31.4 trillion debt ceiling by 1st of June. US President Joe Biden spoke to White House Speaker Kevin McCarthy in a crucial one-to-one meeting on Monday to address the pressing issue to avoid a debt default, but there was no deal at the end of it. The White House meeting came after Biden returned from his trip to Asia early to cut out a deal ahead of the US Treasury's June 1st cutoff date for the Congress to authorize more borrowing. Now remember, debt limits are raised periodically to cover existing approved loans, but House Republicans are now demanding significant spending cuts to address the nation's substantial $31.8 trillion debt as a condition for averting a default, and therefore the deadlock continues. Joining me at this point in time is markets commentator Srinath Sridharan. Also with us is Ishita Mukherjee, who is a professor at University of Calcutta. With me in the studio is my colleague Karthik Malhotra. Appreciate you all taking time out. Ishita, I want to begin by asking, what exactly is a debt ceiling and why is it significant?
Actually, this is different from countries like India, where we have a percentage fiscal deficit as the ceiling. So we have a percentage of GDP as the ceiling. But in United States, it's in terms of quantitative terms. So as this is in quantitative terms, so the maximum amount of debt, maximum quantity of debt is the ceiling. And as this is the maximum quantity of debt is the ceiling, and US increased the ceiling to 78 times more than that. In fact, we need to increase the quantitative terms. But this time, this has been very serious. As this is serious because this is going to affect the economy to a large extent, because US will not be able to pay the dues, and US will not be able to finance the US development.
Okay.
So it will fail. There will be a failure on part of the US government. So as far as it is being told, as far as the US debt crisis, that's why this is becoming a grave crisis. This is post-COVID, and within a period of depression in the economy, in the global rate, and also post-2007-8 financial crisis. So the earlier days, it was a little different time, but this time, this is grave, and this is actually very grave this time, that US will not be able to fund.
All right. Karthik, very grave. US has reached a ceiling, the maximum ceiling to which it could, take on more debt. It's crucial, it's impending, but there is a deadlock here.
Yeah, so like Professor Mukherjee was mentioning, Shweta, in India we have the debt to GDP ratio, which is, so they are correlated, they are proportionately balanced. In the US, there's a numeric value given to the threshold of how much the Congress permits the US Treasury to borrow from the markets or from international partners. But I think the deadlock emerges primarily on account of the fact that the Congress, backed by the Republicans, is asking the Joe Biden administration to cut down on spending. So they are saying, give us a roadmap for the next 10 years. How are you going to cut spending? And this spending is actually, if you look at it, essential spending. So I was reading in the Wall Street Journal, and they've given a fairly interesting account, of how much is the debt in the overall contribution of the US economy's pie. So for every $4 that the US economy spends, $1 is leveraged. So $1 comes from debt. Okay. Now the point being, every economy is leveraged. Every organization broadly is leveraged. So why do you leverage? Why do you induct debt in your books? You induct debt because you want to grow faster than what your means permit you to. It's pretty much like you and me. We want to buy a car or we want to buy a house. We can't afford it up front, but we know it is important for us. We take a loan and that loan is sometimes more bloated than what our pockets can afford, but then it's imperative to take that loan to continue growing. That's the case with corporations as well. You don't have enough liquid cash, but you know that you are building assets and you're building something that is going to give you returns later. So on account of that growth, you take debt on your books. That's what countries do as well. That's what India also does. Every country does. But specifically in the US, they have a fairly strong social sector with the social security, with free education, with their military expenses, with their healthcare expenses. And remember, this is also a more aging population than India. And with the overall social security and these free sort of socialist schemes that US continues to, to harbor and invest in, these become critical expenses that the US government has to bear. Now, the X date, as it is referred to, X like the numeric X date, the X date is 1st of June 2023. On 1st of June, if the debt ceiling is not raised and if the Treasury, which is equivalent to their Ministry of Finance, is not allowed by the Congress to borrow more money, it doesn't have enough money in its pockets to meet its obligations on all these accounts.
Okay.
Now, in addition to this, you have the treasury bills, which are equivalent to the G-SECs, government securities in our case, the bonds, and you have investments that are going to mature. This is already money which is lying with the government. The yield on that or the return has to be given back to people who have invested in those securities. And of course, the overall military spends, education, healthcare, social security, all these are fundamental bills which have to be paid by the US government, which unless it is unable to borrow, on 1st of June, that X date, the doomsday sort of gets met, and the US doesn't have money to honor those bills, and hence the possibility of default, which has never happened in the US because
Absolutely.
US is the safest haven. US Treasury has never defaulted. You have never had a situation that a bill in the US government has not been honored. So it is a big deal. It is definitely a big deal, and it happened last in 2011, if memory serves me right. But again, a consensus was arrived at just in time, a couple of days before the X date was arrived at, and there are talks that this time around also in the nick of time we will arrive at a situation that Congress gives the go ahead to the Treasury to raise the ceiling on debt. But what Janet Yellen is also saying is interesting. She's saying it's an archaic concept.
There should not be any
It's an archaic,
ceiling.
you don't need a ceiling. You borrow as much as is required, as much as you want to leverage yourself to continue growing at the pace you want to grow at.
Absolutely. Let's bring in Srinath at this point.
Great.
Now, Srinath is joining us. Srinath, what do you make of Janet Yellen's statement that you should be allowed to borrow as much as you like? Would that be a fair concept? And I understand, a default is very unlikely. Similar situations have, and there's precedence. So similar situation has arrived or has happened earlier as well in the US back in 2011, where they came very close to defaulting, but it didn't come through. This is more political than economic. But if US were to default, what exactly are we looking at?
Yeah, I think just like most of the Hollywood movies, I think this is a pot boiler where we know the outcome. I'm betting on US won't default, it can't default, and I'll address why I'm saying so. But the plot in which they narrate makes it for interesting to say US is great. It's the greatest democracy. Of how all the stakeholders came together to save the world. I think they will score more political brownie points with this entire aspect. So the hero will never die in an Indian movie, very, very similar. But what we are forgetting is, it is almost like, since the IPL season is on, imagine IPL changing rules every day to suit the star player. US is doing exactly that. It has almost every 5 to 6 years changed its debt.
Okay. I think we Sorry, Srinath. Yes, please.
So the rules can't keep changing, and that's something I think, coming back to the question about Janet Yellen's speech, I think it's absurd. You can't keep shifting the goalpost. How do then rating agencies, especially do sovereign rating? They want to ensure that US will remain the dollar will remain as a reserve currency, and their rating will be spectacular rating as well. What we don't forget is, if you look at the top 10 holders, sovereign holders, including Japan and China, who hold T-bills, I think it's to the tune of nearly $8 trillion of US Treasury bills. It's a substantial number, which is Just to give a perspective, last year alone, the US government spent nearly $400 billion on interest payments. So if you're talking about the top 10 nations holding there, it's 20x the interest payment. So you can't have, and it's the usual banking problem, right? If somebody has borrowed 100 rupees, is not bothered. But if somebody has borrowed 100 crores, the bank is bothered. It's the same thing. More number of debt that keeps increasing for the US, it's troublesome for the world. And more importantly, where is the moral gumption for the nation that nominates the president of World Bank? I mean, if you default, what right do you have to say that I'm going to set rules for institutional funding and sovereign funding growth? I mean, a lot of those geopolitical issues are also there.
All right. It appears we have lost Srinath, but essentially I think what he's saying is you cannot keep changing the goalpost and you cannot keep borrowing as much as you like because that will act against market forces.
But I think somewhere the treasury is going to balance that.
Okay.
Right. You need to, so see, US is also in a situation right now that we've been noticing that step up on the Fed rates, on interest rates. They've been hiking every month practically. Inflation is high. So US does need the money, right? And you can suck out only this much liquidity from the market, but then there is interest to be paid on that as well, which banks by way of lending to institutions can mark up and the delta sort of offsets. But broadly speaking, you definitely need money to grow, right? And the US is cognizant of the fact that it does need some leverage to grow, and there are impending bills that need to be honored. But what Srinath was referring to again was this fact of the ratings actually getting cut, and this also happened in 2011. In 2011, I think it was Fitch or one of these rating agencies which had cut down the AAA rating of US Treasury bills, and that in turn sort of entails that the credit offtake that the US does is at a higher rate than what it otherwise gets with a better rating. So the ratings definitely come in. That becomes one critical function. But in addition to that, yeah, obviously you have more critical everyday expenses which will have to be prioritized, which will have to be honored first. And I think growth comes later. Sustenance will have to take precedence, and sustenance activities will have to be honored, for which I think the US should have some money. If it doesn't have money for that, then it's definitely a problem.
Absolutely. It is a problem. And let me get in Ishita at this point in time. Ishita, we understand that it is a big issue to the point where Joe Biden had to cancel Quad's meeting, go back to the US. He's currently in process of getting more and more people on board, talking to as many people as possible, including the White House Speaker. But the deadlock continues. We don't know how long it will continue. We understand from what has happened in the past that there will be a resolution. But coming back to the question of what happens in case there is no resolution, are we looking at US defaulting, and what does that mean?
No, I don't think no resolution will be there. I see a resolution will be there. It's never happened. But if we have a no resolution, that would mean a serious crisis in the global capitalist system. It's already crisis, and it will have effect on the European countries, and it will have a tremendous trade effect in all the other countries with whom the US is having the trade ties. It will have its spillover effects in the global market. With US defaulting, this would mean that, like the other crises, when the crisis is mostly it was dissipated throughout the world, but if there is a default, the anxiety that we have at this moment is that it will be dissipated throughout the world. And already the post-COVID, the V-shaped recovery is not to be seen in many parts of the world. Many of the countries are suffering. We are already suffering from inflation. Inflation is being talked about, but what is not being talked about is the unemployment and hunger.
Okay,
What is
we
not being
will
talked
take
about
some
is
time, Ishita, we will of course take some time out and talk about unemployment and hunger. Those are important issues, but keeping our focus on the US debt ceiling, we understand that deadlock continues. We'll keep tracking all the details emerging from that story. We're going to shift focus for now. Indians are going abroad more than ever. The boom in fact in overseas travel has led to foreign currency spends by Indians jumping $7.5 billion to a record of $27.1 billion in financial year 23. Almost 90% additional spending under RBI's liberalized remittance scheme came from foreign travel alone. Looking at the RBI data, foreign currency spendings were about at $19.6 billion in financial year 22, about $12.7 billion in financial year 21, which was relatively lower amid travel restraints during the pandemic. Until financial year 2018, Indians were on average spending less than $1 billion every month. Now they're spending close to $27 billion annually. Those are big figures. Joining us at this point in time is Manan Bajoria, who's the Group VP Growth of ixigo. Also with me is my colleague Karthik. Karthik, a lot of boom in travel, quite on the expected lines. And what is surprising is the most remittance under LRS is coming from travel alone.
And I'm a little surprised, Shweta, looking at these numbers because, you know, the estimation was that the total forex spend from India internationally would be about $24 billion, and it was estimated that 50% of that is actually going to be travel, tourism, credit card spends, etc. Right? But the number is 27 billion, right, which is a good 3 billion more than what was estimated. And yeah, I think these were the numbers, and this was the data that maybe the government was toying with when the LRS was introduced, and the idea then being that hey, it might be a good idea to actually get some tax collected here. Now, thankfully, the 20% law sort of got done away with, but we are still perhaps looking at about 5% TCS. But yeah, the trend is clear actually, because
up to 7
this is
lakh?
pent up. Yeah, exactly, up to 7 lakh. Now, the trend in foreign travel is clear. I think this is both a pent up demand, which during COVID and the fact that flights were grounded, travel was completely a no-no, and visa etc. was a problem, COVID testing was mandatory. So these are all issues that existed, and this is pent-up demand and revenge travel that one saw and continues to see. But in addition to that, I think it also speaks greatly about the fact that that Indians have the disposable income now to be spending this kind of money on traveling abroad.
Okay.
So yeah, so these are interesting data points to really make sense of collectively with the travel industry, with airlines, and we've seen even in domestic travel, domestic airlines are reaching record number of flyers month after month. The queues at airports, despite tickets being so expensive, are getting longer by the day, and so is the case internationally as well.
Okay, before we go to Manan, we are trying to patch him through. Two interesting data points or developments that have happened in the past week that we tracked very closely. One was with respect to TCS on credit card spends. Other was TCS on foreign tours and travel packages.
That's right.
Now, TCS on credit card spends, there is now a limit of up to 7 lakh. If you spend beyond that, you will attract a 20% TCS. Those were the developments as of yesterday.
Right. That's right.
But the TCS on foreign tours and travel packages continues to be at 20%.
That's right.
It was at 5, jumped to 20%.
That's right.
And people are worried in industry.
It's at 5% until 1st of July.
Until
from 1st
July,
it's
20%.
That's
So
right.
people are worried in industry because that's a substantial chunk of money, which essentially means, and I don't think there is a limit to that, there is no ceiling to it, which means if I was spending 1 lakh,
you're still paying 1,20,000
I'm paying
rupees.
1,20,000 rupee, and we can go and we can corroborate that with our taxes and maybe get our taxes back, but that's going to be a 1-year-long affair. Essentially, it is going to hinder people's ability to travel.
Absolutely, and my whole sort of issue with even the travel and tours sector being taxed at 20%, why is that? Even if you want to do that, I mean, assume there is some logic and rationality in that 20% tax TCS, why is that restricted to foreign travel alone? Tour packages can be booked for domestic travel as well. You have the same agencies, you have the same people. There is no guarantee, so to speak, that the tax evaders are the guys who are spending money, you know, and perhaps spending cash on travel and tour to travel only abroad. They could well be spending the
within
same amount
this
of money
country.
to travel to Goa, to travel to Coorg, to travel to Leh,
So it's
Ladakh,
not then
Manali,
wrong
anywhere.
to assume
Right.
that the government only wants to tax foreign travel.
That
And
is what it seems to be. Right.
And maybe sort of act as a deterrent to foreign travel while promoting, of course, traveling within India.
Oh yeah, I think the two are not mutually exclusive. You know, you could promote Indian tourism in any case. You really don't need to penalize international travel. Rather, you need to incentivize domestic travel. And incentives are not always monetary. To my mind, incentives and the nudges work much better if the social sort of structure around travel is worked upon, improved. Begins straight from infrastructure, flight connectivity, roads, no potholes, cleanliness, enough options, private investments made into the hospitality sector, food. You know, there are multiple souvenir shops. I mean, you know, I discuss this often. If somebody, and you know, a cousin or a friend traveling from abroad coming into India, and like the case is
bring
usually,
you souvenirs.
Yeah, where do you get souvenirs?
Right.
You go to Red Fort, you go to India Gate, you go to you know, anywhere, you go to Khan Market for that matter. You travel anywhere in Delhi, Mumbai, except for the airport, where there are these private stores which have come up which really jack up prices on shot glasses and fridge magnets. There is no way in India that you can actually get an India or a New Delhi you know, a Kali Pili taxi in Bombay or a green and yellow auto rickshaw in Delhi.
Right.
You can't buy those souvenirs on the streets in India, and that is the overall development that needs to be done to nudge and incentivize international and domestic travel within India than restricting people to travel abroad.
Absolutely. Manan joining us at this point in time. Manan, appreciate you taking time out. We understand that the entire industry is currently struggling with the announcement of TCS on credit card and TCS on travel tours booking, overseas and overseas travel booking, and that is going to be a major jolt, as we understand, to the entire sector. What exactly are your concerns?
Yeah, I think over the latest ruling that the government has exempted till 7 lakhs, right? I think that brings in a lot of relief for a majority of customers out there where they might
But
not
Manan,
be
that
reaching
7 lakh, sorry to cut you short, Manan, that 7 lakh rupees valid for credit card spends abroad. But any travel and tour package to be booked from India, our understanding states that there is going to be a TCS imposed on that, 5% until 30th of June and 20% 1st July onwards. Is that right, or has the industry picked up some other signals?
Yeah,
I'm talking about travel and tour booking.
Exactly, that's the current interpretation that is there. Fortunately for us, we don't have tours and packages with ixigo right now. So we are not that much impacted by this. People can still go ahead and book their tickets without any, and pay via credit card and debit card, right? Without much impact, as long as you are within the ceiling limits that are there. So from that perspective, definitely. But yeah, from a government standpoint, I think it's really not clear, right? Like, why is it that 20% is actually needed? For if tax evasion is basically the purpose, then even 5% is enough, right? Because the tax is anyways getting deducted. So I think that's definitely a bummer for the travel and tourism industry, especially with the demand that we are seeing, right? With the upcoming summer vacation season.
Can I then, if you may permit, does it mean that it's going to be beneficial to you because people are going to less likely to take to travel packages and are more likely to book their travel independently?
You could say that we are yet to see how many percentage of those users will eventually make that shift, right? Because there's a certain segment of users who is a DIY user, who is okay to manage and book everything on their own. They would search for the best deals, book flights, hotels independently, book activities independently, right? But there is a certain segment, and especially for complicated tours like Europe, USA, etc., where people do look for packages which cover everything, right? They don't need to worry. They want Indian food. And that's where the group tours like SOTCs and Thomas Cooks of the world will really help. So that certain segment would still be there, but I do think there might be a small shift in people who would want to now go more independently if they can just do their own research and make their own bookings.
All
So,
right.
Manan, what is prompting this trend that we've seen? $27 billion spent on international travel seems like a fairly sizable chunk of the economy and the citizens taking on to overseas travel. And this is something new. This is not something that we have seen previously. So, of course, if there was pent-up demand, the pent-up demand also, there was a full 1 year where COVID had ebbed down considerably. So, what are the drivers that you see when you speak to your customers or your sales teams which are out in the market interacting with clients? What is it which is driving Indians to take on to overseas travel so significantly right now?
Yeah, so I think in last year during the summer vacation season, we were still coming out of the third wave, right? There was still hesitancy in users' mind whether they should travel, whether there'll be a fourth wave, etc. But I think now people have realized that it's sort of part and parcel, and everyone is basically in that YOLO and FOMO mode out there. And last time we also had a lot of issues with respect to visas, right? There were tremendous wait times, and I think that's again repeating for some of the few countries in Europe this time again. There were issues last time. The inventory had also not really scaled up post-COVID, especially on the international side last year. But this year, the inventory has also increased. More airlines have launched routes, right? So all of that is definitely contributing. And we are at ixigo seeing a lot more demand for Southeast Asian countries like Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia, Bali, etc. Right? Because these are still comparatively cheaper versus the likes of Europe and US.
Okay, I also want to understand, as Karthik pointed out, these are significant numbers, and I'm sure you've enjoyed a share of the pie yourself. How do you see this panning forward? Do you think the coming financial year starting April this year is going to be better than last year, or the pent-up demand has been met and people now want to sit at homes?
No, I think the momentum has just begun. We are seeing a tremendous growth both on the domestic as well as on the international side when it comes to flights and hotel bookings. So I think it's only going to get better. We have the upcoming summer vacations have just started in northern India, right? So the next 2 months.
What sort of traction are you looking at during the upcoming summer vacation? What sort of inquiries are you looking at?
So our inquiries for example, if I look at year-on-year comparison, they are up almost 30 to 40% for key domestic destinations as well as international destinations. So that's sort of an uptick that we are seeing. We are hitting all-time highs when it comes to our bookings, and they're growing very well. The domestic market has fully recovered. In fact, it's now much more than the pre-COVID. We are touching almost 4.3 lakh packs, right? There has been a slight dip due to all the Go First issues. But yeah, barring that, I think the market has recovered fantastically. And I see with upcoming travel, and then there's festive season that will start from September.
For spending as much as $27 billion, that's a huge chunk of the money. Government, of course, trying to get its pie of whatever it can in terms of tax. And taxes, of course, is an important story. Tax on both credit cards as well as foreign tours and travel packages. The impact that it's going to have will only come up after 1st of July, which is the date on which it will be implemented. Shifting focus for now, there is an update in the Richie Rich Club from real estate sector of the country. DLF Chairman Rajiv Singh remains the wealthiest Indian real estate entrepreneur with a wealth of 59,000 crore rupees, according to a rich list that has been compiled by GROHE-HURUN India. With a wealth of 42,270 crore, Mangal Prabhat Lodha and his family of macro-tech developers come in at second position, while Arjun Menda and family of Bengaluru-based RMZ Corporation debuted at third position on the list with a total fortune of 26,000 crore rupees. Chandru Raheja and family of K. Raheja Corporation have successfully held on to the fourth position, while Hiranandani Communities founder Niranjan Hiranandani is currently at fifth position with a fortune of 23,900 crore rupees. The top 10 real estate billionaires accounted for 60% of cumulative wealth. That is according to the rich list that has just come out. Joining us at this point in time is Anas Rehman Junaid, who's the Managing Director and Chief Researcher at Hurun India. Also going to join us very, very shortly is Bobby Joseph, who's a leader at GROHE. But before they come in, Karthik, this is a growing rich list, but interesting, you know, as far as when you look at the trends that have emerged, which is the top 10 billionaires are accounting for 60% of the cumulative wealth in the real estate sector, essentially. And this is not to be laughed at, but inequality even within billionaires, come to think of it.
Yeah, I mean, the range is fairly, the range is fairly
Absolutely.
vast. The range is vast. I mean, you're talking about 60,000 crores versus 23,000 crores. I mean, the delta is huge, but real estate, in any case, belongs to the rich, right? And it is a sector where only the moneyed can sort of, you know, make more and more money. And it is a sector where you're acquiring land, and land always appreciates. So what you're talking about here is net worth. What you're talking here about is basically the value of the assets that you own, and not necessarily, you know, the revenue you've made in a year or the profit you've made in a year. This is your net worth, and net worth, of course, you know, is a function of what all assets you own universally, not just restricted to the house you live in or the car you drive. In this case, it is acres and acres of land, which is also technically your property. You've built on it, you've sold certain flats, you've kept some. So yeah, that is what what we're really looking at. But you're right, that disparity is fairly huge between all the haves in the have list.
And the haves in the that's rightly put, haves in the haves list. Let me quickly run our audiences through some of the key takeaways of that list. The total wealth is up by 4% in the overall list. Cumulative wealth of the top 100 in the GROHE-HURUN India Rich list stands at on an upward of 400,000 crore, which is up 4% as against 2022. 25% of the list was replaced, which means we've seen more names coming in. 23 new entrants and 2 re-entrants in the rich list. 47% of the list was replaced over 5 years. Interesting trend. 47% of the people were replaced in the rich list, which essentially means more and more entrepreneurs are making it big when it comes to money and real estate.
Shweta, either that or the value of land, the circle rate, the value of the property that they own has spiked up.
Absolutely.
So there are markets which continue to grow faster than markets which are a little slower. So I think it's a function of which sector in a city happens to suddenly go bigger and grow in terms of its value.
Right.
And that sort of, reflects on the net richness, the net wealth, net proceeds of an individual or an organization.
Okay, Anas is with us, so is Bobby. Anas, coming to you. Okay, Bobby is through us. We're getting Anas very, very shortly. Bobby, help us understand, and this is interesting, 47% of the list was replaced over the last 5 years, and Karthik believes that essentially boils down to the fact that prices of land that you have acquired or you've had, or it was in your possession, has also changed significantly. Is that the reason why there is a fast change in the list, or is there more to it? Is it because more and more entrepreneurs are foraying into real estate? What would you account this trend to?
So one of the things is that yes, the wealth of land has increased substantially, especially in the key metro cities. But there's also new players that are coming in, and I'm sure Anas, who's with Hurun and the CEO of Hurun, would be able to shed more light on that. But from what we've seen, it's clearly the cost of land today that has gone substantially high in metro cities. And if you really look at it, that is if you look at Gurgaon itself, the cost over the last 1 year has escalated quite a bit.
Which are the top cities, Bobby, that you are exploring right now? Of course, we know the usual suspects. We know Delhi, NCR, we know Mumbai, we know Bangalore, we know Hyderabad. But in the tier 2 cities, are there some indicators that you're getting on where land, circle rates, property prices, the rate of acquisition of land, etc., is really shooting up through the sky right now, which should be areas for our audience to at least watch for from an investment perspective?
I wouldn't say shooting up drastically, but yes, they are going up. Markets like Pune, Hyderabad, Chandigarh, Jaipur. More recently, we've seen increase in places like Rajkot.
Why is that so? What is attributing to growth of a city like Rajkot?
I strongly believe it is the industrialization that is happening.
Okay.
Today, if you look at commercial activity, these cities are growing phenomenally well, and that is where the developers are also moving, because today the aspiration of the people is to have good quality life, and that's what the developers are actually catering to. And there is, as income levels increase, disposable income is pretty high in these markets.
Okay. And what about other tier 2 cities? You mentioned Jaipur, Lucknow, etc., Pune. These are all tier 1 cities, and these are also state capitals or the next busiest, biggest
Yes.
city after the state capital. In tier 2, what are the trends you're picking up? What about cities like, let's say, Durgapur or Ranchi or alike, which which still don't make it at the same level as, let's say, Lucknow or Jaipur?
True. So we are seeing activity in, say, a smaller city like Dhanbad.
Okay.
It's a much smaller compared to the Tier 1 cities. We are seeing Vizag picking up. So we're seeing some of the Tier 2 cities picking up very strong. Again, I would put this to two or three things. One is the commercial development of these areas. Number one, as infrastructure develops, people are moving to areas where the quality of life also changes, and that's where you're seeing the Tier 2 and the Tier 3 cities also growing. For example, in the past you did not have Ranchi, but Ranchi is coming into the picture. If you look at even the south, we are seeing markets where, for example, I wouldn't consider Coimbatore as Tier 2; it's still coming as Tier 1 for us. But there is growth. Madurai, Coimbatore are cities where we are seeing growth. Northern part of Kerala is seeing a large amount of commercial activity. I think as infrastructure grows, you will see more and more of this. As tourism grows, you're going to see more of the hospitality business spreading across the country.
Another interesting trend, and I want to bring in Anas here. Anas, western region states like Maharashtra and Gujarat are accounting for 40% of the cumulative wealth of real estate billionaires. Essentially, most billionaires emerging from Maharashtra and Gujarat, and there's been an increase of 83% over the last 5 years. So, what is driving growth in these markets?
Hi, thanks for the opportunity. See, this is basically analysis of how these entrepreneurs are creating wealth and value of the last few years. And if you ask me specifically, even when you look at the India Rich List, which we launch every year, the biggest wealth creators are coming from creations happening in Maharashtra, Karnataka, then Gujarat, Delhi, and so on. So Maharashtra and Gujarat has always been one of the top wealth-creating economies in India. From that perspective, if you extrapolate that further, one of the important trends to note here is where is the rising income levels in the country, right? So if you extrapolate that, we could easily say that it is a factor of rising income levels. Wealth being created in this country, which will have an impact on the buying capacity of the consumers there, which will of course have a trickle-down effect on in terms of real estate economy doing well there. So that is the explanation that I could think of from a rich list standpoint and wealth creation perspective.
Which are the cities or which are the sectors which are falling off the grid as far as the rich list in the real estate sector goes, which I assume would be, of course, a function of the land prices?
Yeah, I'm not an expert in land prices, to be honest, but to be honest, if you do a simple comparisons, right? From my perspective, all these sectors are doing really well. I look at the whole thing as from a 5 to 6 year window, right? Just to give you some numbers, residential, for instance, right? If you just look at the revenue growth, the revenue of all the listed companies in the GROHE-HURUN real estate rich list, if you just take the revenues of the last 1 year, it's gone up by 18%. So
Okay.
residential revenues have gone up just from the list. And if you look at the cumulative wealth created by commercial real estate entrepreneurs in the list, that has also gone up. Hospitality has had a great comeback after COVID. So, and if you look at the threshold to enter the top 10 in the list, it's gone up by 5 times from 3,000 crores to rupees 15,000 crores. Threshold to enter the top 50 in the list has gone up by 2 times from 600 crores to about 1,300 crores. And 1/4 of the list is replaced, which is new top wealth creators are coming from tier 1, tier 2. So overall, if you ask me, Indian real estate is possibly firing from all the cylinders. Maybe every year there could be a winner and a loser, but cumulatively every sector is one.
All right. I also want you to quickly run us through, Anas, at this point in time, some of the most interesting takeaways of the list before I let you go.
I think the biggest takeaway of the list is a few things. One is, of course, one heartening takeaway for me is that I always had the question: why aren't Indian real estate companies building national brands? They're all local heroes, but why aren't they building national brands? When we put out the list in 2017, only 15% of the list had operations beyond their primary state of origin. Let's say Bangalore, or Karnataka, or so on, right? But then fast forward to the current year, almost 60% of the list have their operations beyond their origin. So more and more national brand.
Right. All right, I think we've lost Anas. Anas, Bobby, thanks very much for joining with your inputs on that very important story. Nearly 1/4 of the rich list in real estate has been replaced. More billionaires coming in from tier 2, tier 3 city. Now that's heartening. Those are, of course, very interesting numbers. But we're going to move on for now. The second day of G20 Tourism Working Group meeting is underway in Srinagar. The meetings are being held at Sher-e-Kashmir International Conference Centre in Srinagar from 22nd to 24th of May. The first day of G20 tourism meeting began on 22nd as a large delegation arrived at Sheikhul Alam International Airport in Srinagar despite a boycott call from China and Pakistan. India is hosting a significant international event in Jammu and Kashmir after the abrogation of Article 370. The excitement of authorities over Kashmir's role in India's G20 presidency is palpable. Joining us at this point in time is my colleague Aditya Raj Kaul, I beg your pardon, who's an executive editor at TV9. Aditya, I want to begin by asking, how's the second day looking like? How's it unfolded so far? What's on the agenda?
Well, this is the first such international event which is being organized from the G20 platform here in Jammu and Kashmir. A lot of excitement, a lot of color here because the focus has been on tourism and culture. And almost more than 100 delegates participated in this 3-day event. Today is the second day. A lot of focus on tourism, bringing in cinema. Both Indian and foreign cinema here in Jammu and Kashmir has been the focus as well. We just minutes ago spoke to the Lieutenant Governor Manoj Sinha as well as the India's chief coordinator for G20, Harshvardhan Shringla, who briefed the media persons on how much of a success this event has been. Let's also remember that Jammu and Kashmir has been a conflict-ridden state where there's been continuous Pakistan-sponsored terrorism. But even though there were threats from Pakistan, from Pakistani terror groups, very angry, atrocious statements coming in from Bilawal Bhutto and others, yet this event has been a massive success. So clearly today the working group meeting at the Sherpa track of G20 happened, and tomorrow also this is going to continue. They are witnessing Jammu and Kashmir, which is often referred to as paradise on earth. And getting to know how beautiful this location is and how difficult this was to organize, but yet it has been a massive success. It is the first ever such international event which is taking place here in Srinagar. And these G20 countries are not just the official representatives. There are several unofficial representatives who have also come, for instance, tour operators, trade delegations and others, including that from Saudi Arabia and Turkey. China did boycott this event at the behest of Pakistan, but certainly overall this G20 event has been a success. We'll have to wait and watch. Will this be first of many such events that really take place in the Kashmir Valley?
Right. Aditya, before you joined us, it's good to see you joining in from Srinagar. You've definitely got better weather than we have here in Noida. But yeah, I think tomorrow you'll come and experience the Noida weather in person. But before I let you go, just before you joined us, we were doing the story on how Indians have spent about $27 billion on international travel. So I think the task for the G20 is very well cut out, and maybe you should be a brand ambassador for that while you're there in Srinagar and get those $27 billion to come and visit Srinagar and Jammu and Kashmir.
Absolutely, absolutely. I would love to be the brand ambassador, but certainly the weather behind me is, something that we in Noida really crave for. But Karthik, what I can tell you is that a lot of focus has been on investments as well. And Jammu and Kashmir, as you know, has had trade MOUs with UAE. A lot of malls from MR Group and others are being constructed. At least there's been a pledge that's been made. in Srinagar. And apart from that, one should realize that the tourism has seen a boom in Jammu and Kashmir over the last 2 to 3 years, post-pandemic era. Only last year, we had 1.8 million tourists really coming in here to Jammu and Kashmir. And this year, with the Amarnath Yatra also beginning in a month from now, the numbers are going to be much higher.
But
and the Jammu and Kashmir
apart from
government has
right, Aditya, apart from what the government is doing in investing in infrastructure, etc., do you see some private investments also coming in, especially in the capital Srinagar and surrounding areas, in terms of hospitality, hotels, food joints? Are we seeing any of that infrastructure, which is usually on account of private investments, also getting built in the state?
Well, yes. Immediately after the 370 abrogation that happened on 5th August 2019, a lot of focus has been on private investments really coming in. A lot of MOUs have been signed and events both in Jammu and Kashmir as well as Delhi and Mumbai. I can tell you, yesterday I was speaking with the chief of the owner of the Lalit Hotel Groups, which has the largest hotel here in Jammu and Kashmir, the Lalit Grand Palace. And she said that, the tourist season is, the biggest right now, and they're keen on starting many more projects here in Kashmir. We know for sure that the Apollo Group and several other, hospital chains in, India are also keen on starting their businesses and operations in Jammu and Kashmir. So yes, investments is something that Jammu and Kashmir government and several private players have been interested in. But one should also realize that this has been a security state in many ways because of the Pakistan-sponsored terrorism. So one factor that has been on the mind of these private investors has been the security scenario. But the government has been telling them that security would be provided, and the security graph statistically has come down drastically and dramatically in the last 4 years. So let's hope that the G20 really gives that boost to this investment, and both at tourism and hospitality.
Absolutely. Hopeful that the G20 travel working groups meeting in Kashmir is going to boost and prop up tourism prospects in the valley. We will, of course, keep tracking the meeting that ends on 24th of May. Aditya, appreciate you joining us with all those details. But with that, it's a wrap on this edition of Business Plus. Keep watching News 9.